Okay, let's have a seat. Let's get started. And just as a heads up, the live stream is going for you guys. So I always say, watch what you say, because the microphone picks you up pretty clearly. But hey, listen, let's talk real quick here as folks are straggling in about what the next couple of days are going to look like. If you're having trouble printing, just email to me. But listen, please. Okay, so we've got 5 days left before we go to Thanksgiving break. By the time we finish up with next Tuesday, I would like to be at a point where we are done with the Civil War, and then when we come back from Thanksgiving break, we have all sorts of schedule interruptions coming our way, whether it be I-step makeups or the ASVAB test, it's just like one thing after another. But when we get back from Thanksgiving break, we're going to have 3 weeks left, and then we're at finals. So I will take that time, whatever time that we've got there, for number one, making sure that we get our states and capitals test out of the way. Talk more about that tomorrow. And two is to sort of cover let's fill the gap between end of the Civil War and coming up on 1900. So that's kind of where we're going within the rest of class. The next couple of days, though, leading up to Thanksgiving, are going to focus on this particular topic that I've got up here on the board. Now, we didn't have a whole lot of time to get to the war itself. I don't like that. It's not what I want. But when you have to cover a lot of history in a short period of time, you got to cut somewhere. So, I cut out a few of the battles, let the timeline kind of do that work. We've spent a lot of time talking about why this war happens. We will spend a considerable amount of time talking about what happens after it. And that, I think, is really the crucial part of maybe the entire discussion of the Civil War. What happens here in the 8 years or so following the Civil War is going to set us up for so much of what we're going to talk about throughout the rest of this class. Everything from an era of U.S. history known as Jim Crow, all the way up through the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s and 70s. All of that traces a lot of its roots to what's going to happen here in this 8 years or so following the end of the Civil War. So each of you, Carly came around, gave you guys a couple of these questions. This is the last one that we will do for this unit, certainly through Thanksgiving. Should be easy points for you, heading into the midterm. But follow through as we go. And as we get started here, I want to start us in 1863. And that's a little further in. But part of your timeline was the Battle of Gettysburg. 3 days in July in 1863. Take all 3 of those days combined, and you have the bloodiest battle of the American Civil War. A lot of people died at Gettysburg. The reason why that's such a big battle, number one, leading up to Gettysburg, Robert E. Lee, and who is Robert E. Lee? Commander of the Confederate or the Southern troops. Robert E. Lee is rolling victory after victory, and he wants to end this war, and he believes that to do that, he has got to win a big victory in the North. So that's what he's doing at Gettysburg. He's invading the North, looking for a battle, looking for a victory. Now, this ends up being a turning point in favor of the North. They win. They push Lee south. He will never come north again. And from that point on, the snowball starts rolling down the other side of the hill. Momentum is on the side of the North now. Right? So that, we sort of fast forward things through the timeline, and we end up in April of 1865. Right? April of 1865. By this point, Ulysses Grant is the general, the commander of the Union Army. This is the guy that Lincoln's been waiting on. Grant was one of these characters who wanted you to surrender without any sorts of conditions. You know, sometimes people would surrender and they'd say, look, we will surrender to you if you will let us do this. Grant was more of a mind of saying, you will surrender or we will annihilate you. That's why they called him unconditional surrender Grant. That's what he expected. So by April of 65, Grant has got Lee pinned into Richmond, and Lee has nowhere else to go. And so he handwrites a note to Ulysses S. Grant, sends it across the line, and he asks, can we sit down and talk about surrender? Now, this is a little bit different for Grant. He and Lee are old friends. They fought in Mexico. There was a lot of that in the Civil War, friend fighting friend. All right, and so Grant writes him back on the same piece of paper and says, you know, sure, let's do that. I've had some cool moments in my life. Being able to hold that note was a cool moment. It was written as a friend would write to a friend. And so they end up meeting up at this guy's house. I don't know if you remember this from the video, but the guy's house, his name is Wilmer McLean, and he had lived, his first home had been at Bull Run. His farm was at Bull Run where the first battle was fought. And if you can remember from the video, a cannonball actually goes through this guy's kitchen. And so he packs up his family and moves them to safety. And then the place that he moves them to, it's in his living room where Grant and Lee meet to sign the surrender. Just a weird historical coincidence that it would play out that way. Okay? Now, we have the surrender, the war is over, and now the hard part begins. What do I mean by that? That the war is over, and now the hard part begins. Avery? I mean, that's one part of it. What else would be a part of saying that now the hard part begins? The war is over. What are we going to do with the slaves? Yeah, what are we going to do with the slaves? What else do you think would be part of saying this is now the hard part? I mean, I think that that's really the big question here. Guys, this is not some war with a foreign country. I've tried to stress that to you. We have one half of the country at that point that has completely broken away and has now fought and killed members from the other half of the country. All right, so we've got this wide gaping chasm between North and South. What do we do now? How do we bring that together? How do we close that together? And that's going to be the question that is going to plague us for the next long past Reconstruction. Some would say we're still dealing with that question in 2018. But it is a stressful time. It is a stressful time. How do we pull this country together? And I'll tell you, one thing I always like to do, just to highlight how stressful this was, is to do so visually. So let me show you two pictures. Okay, the picture that I'm going to put up there first, you know this guy, Abe Lincoln. That is a picture of Abe Lincoln. It's my favorite picture of Abe Lincoln, taken just after he took the oath of office as president in 1861. So just looking at him, how would you describe the Abe Lincoln that we see in this photograph? What's the look that he's projecting here? Landon, we got. What? He looks like. That's not what I'm looking for. No, but hey, all jokes aside, like, describe the look on Lincoln's face here. How would you describe that? Yeah, we got brother. I mean, I love that. That's exactly what I would say. He definitely has this, bring it on. I think look in his eyes. Very, certainly a look of strength, a look of, that he's not fearful. By this point, several of the states had already succeeded. So looks like a bring it on. Let's get this over with. That is end of March of 1861. The next photo I will show you is almost exactly 4 years later in 1865. What happened? 4 years of war. 4 years, 4 years of war, 4 years of knowing that every time a battle takes place, it is Americans killing Americans. 4 years of knowing that if we can win this, we can bring an end to slavery, which will only make half of the country happy. 4 years of knowing that if we could win, now we've got to try to figure out a way to bring this country back together. Plus, by the time that the war is over, Lincoln has buried 2 of his children. In the midst of a civil war, Abraham Lincoln loses 2 of his sons. So to suggest that this man went through a bit is an understatement. And you can tell, I think the eyes tell the story. I mean, you can tell he wasn't a big guy anyway. He was tall and thin. You can see the weights come off. But like I said, it's those eyes for me. It's just a tale of the war here coming through Lincoln's photographs. War is over. Lincoln brings together, morning of April 14th. Lincoln brings his advisors together. This is a group of people that are known as his cabinet. Every president has one. So he brings his advisors together and he says, look, war is over, and now it's time to bring this country back together, and I have a plan to reconstruct this country. That night, takes a trip to the theater. You guys know what happened there. At no point did he ever say, here was my plan. And that's, I think it's one of the big what ifs. What if Lincoln lived? What if Lincoln lived? How would this have gone? I tend to believe, I've studied a lot of history. Sometimes I think we tend to put people on a pedestal, and they don't deserve to be there. But I think Lincoln deserves every bit that we do. I tend to think that if he had lived, Reconstruction might have been a smooth process. It might have gone well. But all we're left is a what if. Right? So now that he's dead, the war is over. Now it's going to be up to other people to answer the 2 big questions that have to be answered. So now we turn to the questions in front of us. Number 1 says, what are the big issues? I think there's 2. I think there's 2 big issues that we've got to deal with now that the war is over. The first, I've been alluding to it all period, is quite simply, how do we bring everybody back together? I don't think it's as simple as saying, hey, South Carolina, even though you broke away from the country and, South Carolinians have killed Northerners, and, you had slaves. Don't worry, it's all good. Come on back. It's no big deal. No big deal. I don't think it's that easy. I think if you're up north, I think you want punishment. I think if you're down south, you're probably a little bit worried, right? Kind of like if you get in trouble at home, and you know, mom or dad are waiting on you. They're waiting on you. As soon as you pull in the driveway, as soon as you get off the bus, I'll never forget. Some of you know my oldest Grayer. When he was in kindergarten, I've always told my children that if you ever misbehave, I know every one of your teachers, and I will know about it before you know about it. And so I got a phone call from his kindergarten teacher that Grayer had cut a girl's hair, which was wild because, like, if you know Grayer, he is the sweetest kid you'll ever meet. I mean, it kind of blew my mind that it happened. But I was obviously very upset about that, so I walked outside, and I was just standing there with my arms crossed when he stepped off the bus. And as soon as he saw me, he just lost it. Like, he knew. He knew. I got to think, why is he telling us this? I got to think the South is getting ready to get off the bus. And they just got to be thinking, what's going to happen to us, What's going to happen to us? And that's that's, I think, the big question. That's also why the journal prompts, by the way, Hannah, that's what the journal. Hannah wanted to know if my children had been running away, stealing our money or something like that. No, nothing like that. All right, so a couple of things we have to think about. I think, like when we talk about, is there going to be punishment for this? Is there going to be punishment for this? I think it really comes down to this. Okay, when South Carolina and these other states broke away, did they make a hard break from the United States? What do you guys think of it? Yes or no? Did the southern states make a hard break from the United States? Now, Bradley says no. Anybody say yes? I think they did make a hard break. Fifth period was the exact opposite. Everybody said yes. So Bradley, let me come to you. Why would you argue that they did not make a hard break? Okay. Tyra, I saw you. You were doing this. Why? I mean, slavery's like the big one, right? They said slavery's okay. The North said no. Now, just for the sake of playing devil's argument here, because I think that you're arguing the southern point. Up north, I think they would look down south and say, y'all elected a president. You all adopted a brand new flag. You all had a national capital. You all had a Congress. You all had an army. You all made a hard break. What do you think, Howard? You don't have to. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I'm just saying, like, there's two different sides to this. I think down south they're going to say, "Oh, we were just playing. Just take it." Okay. I think up north, though, where there's a little bit more anger. I mean, think about that. Think if you're a northern mom and dad who had kids that lost their lives on a battlefield, killed by a Confederate bullet. Did they make a hard break? Okay. Now, if they did, if they made a hard break, then the U.S. government should be able to say, look, South Carolina, if you want to come back to the Stars and Stripes, here's what you got to do to prove yourself. Got it? Right? So here's what you got to do. We're going to make a little checklist here. You got to meet all these checks before you can come back to the club. If they didn't, as we've had some argue here, and do so well, I think, then it should be as simple as just saying it's all good, come on down. Doors open. They'll get your act together and come on back. That's why I had the journal. They run away, they steal your money. What do you do? I'd like to point out that Olivia Elder, she's putting kids up for adoption over here. Worthless. All right. So that's, guys, look, this is a huge issue. Huge issue. How on earth do you heal this sort of war? I think that's issue number one. Anybody have a guess as to what issue number two is? What do you do? What do you do? Now, what is not up for debate, I want to be clear on this. What is not up for discussion here is slavery itself. By the time this war ends, a fair amount of folks up north are perfectly fine with slavery coming to an end. You got a few people that want it, who I guess could care less, copperheads mostly. But for the most part, a lot of Northerners are on board with ending slavery. Down south, I think most Southern states, by the end of the war, have come to grips with the fact that slavery is over. They know they lost. They have absolutely no doubt that this means that slavery is going to end. They've already come to grips with that in their mind. So this is not a discussion about whether or not slavery should end. That's going to happen. Question is, once slavery ends, we've got 100,000 freed slaves. What do we do for them now? Is freedom enough, or does there need to be more? So those are the two big questions that we have got to consider as we move forward, all right? Now, we're going to see Reconstruction for 8 years, and it's going to run through 3 phases. 3 phases. All right, we're going to start by allowing the President of the United States, who is not Abraham Lincoln, to make the decision as to how we answer these 2 questions. We are going to find pretty quickly that the new guy is a loser who never should have been president. I'll tell you. I'll leave you on the edge of your seat just for a second. But we're going to give him the first chance. After he does a horrible job, then we're going to enter a second phase called radical reconstruction, which I'll talk about mostly tomorrow. And then, thirdly, we'll go through a phase known as redemption. What does it mean to redeem? To be forgiven, maybe? Yeah, right? Yeah. So that's where we will end things. But what I want to look at today with the time we have left is real quick, talk about phase number 1. And that is presidential reconstruction. Talk about a short phase. 1 year. That's all it takes to figure out this ain't working. All right, Lincoln dies. Now, here's what's happened here. Let me give you a little background. Lincoln runs for re-election in 1864. Does anybody remember who Lincoln ran against in 1864? It's an old general.
Washington.
No, George McClellan. Oh, buddy, George McClellan runs against Lincoln and loses, partially, some would say, because Lincoln picks up a new vice president. Right? And that guy is Johnson, this cat up here. Now, what stands out about Andrew Johnson is this, Andrew Johnson probably never should have been president, but it's not like the guy just showed up out of the blue. Okay, Andrew Johnson is from Tennessee, which I think is interesting right off the bat. Because Tennessee is part of the Confederacy. Right? When Tennessee seceded in 1861, our buddy here, Andrew Johnson, was a United States Senator from Tennessee. He was the only senator from the South that stayed loyal to the North. And so because of that, he becomes a little bit of a hero up north. And when Lincoln runs for president again in 64, they decide, hey, this could really be a popular pick to run with him. Let's stick this guy on there. He's never going to do anything. He's never going to have to lead. Let's just get his name on the ticket to make Lincoln look better. Oops. So Andrew Johnson is vice president. Lincoln gets shot. By the way, it's worth noting, Johnson was supposed to die that night too. There was a massive conspiracy that night. There was somebody sent after Lincoln, somebody sent after Johnson, somebody sent after the Secretary of State, a guy named William Seward, and somebody who was also sent after the Secretary of War, a guy named Edwin Stanton. They were cleaning house. The only guy who died that night was Lincoln. Secretary of State Seward, the guy who went after him, Seward was sick. He was actually bedridden sick for a little bit. And the guy who was sent to kill him broke into his house, knocked down some of his family members, ran up and jumped on Seward and stabbed him repeatedly. Face, body, all over. Seward lived from that. The guy who was supposed to kill Johnson got scared, got drunk, and got out of town. Johnson never got touched. But all of those guys were eventually, ganged up on, and they all got hung. Right? So Johnson lives. He's now president. Oops, this is not something we thought would happen. So now it's Johnson's, it's Johnson's time. What do you want to do, Andrew Johnson? And so I asked you on the questionnaire, A, B, C, what are the 3 things that Andrew Johnson says needs to happen in order for the South to be brought back forward. Okay? This is his checklist of things that Southern states must do. First things first. If you're a Southern state and you want to be part of the United States again, letter A, first thing, you have got to ratify the 13th Amendment. Anybody have a guess as to what that amendment does? Okay. That's exactly what it is. Exactly what it is. 13th Amendment was the Emancipation Proclamation put into law. Right? We're going to put in the Constitution that slavery is abolished. If you want back in, you have got to ratify or pass the 13th Amendment. All right, so that's check number one. Check number two. If you were a Confederate soldier, you need to take an oath of loyalty. I swear I like the U.S. There you go. That's all you got to do. Maybe your fingers are crossed behind your back when you do that. I don't know. But if you do that, then Johnson says, we'll give you amnesty. What does amnesty mean? Yeah, right? Yeah. There you go, both of you. Yeah, we'll give you a pardon. Go home, you're good. Stay out of trouble. I don't know. And thirdly, if you do these things, then we'll give you all your land back. You know, the Union Army swept through the South, and every time they would take land from the Confederates, they would hold on to that land. So Johnson says, look, if you do the first two, we'll give you all your land back. Well, gosh, if you're one of these southern states, you're feeling pretty good. I got off with a slap on the wrist, and not even a hard slap. 13th Amendment, abolish slavery, whatever. I already know slavery's over with. You want me to sign a piece of paper? That's fine. Take an oath of loyalty? Sure, I'll put my hand in the air and say, USA, USA. Sure, yeah, no problem. If I do all those things, you're going to give me my land back? You're going to let me be a part of the U.S. again? Sure, I'll do both those things. And what's funny about this is, I mean, that really is it. So southern states started doing this real fast, and then as soon as they did this, they were able to go and start putting their government back together, have elections, elect a governor, elect senators, elect congressmen, rewrite their laws. They can do whatever they want. What about the newly freed slaves? Yeah. How about you? You got freedom. What else? What else do you want? You're free. Andrew Johnson did not care. You're free. Good luck. So you have a situation here where slaves, yes, they are free. They are walking off of these plantations. They have nothing. They have no money. They've never been paid for their work. They have no home. They have no land to farm. They have no food. They have nothing except for freedom now. And that's Andrew Johnson. He's perfectly fine with it. And it's so bad that a lot of these freed slaves, anybody want to take a guess as to what a lot of freed slaves end up doing to make ends meet, Brady? They never leave. They just stay there. They get paid a little bit, but they stay right where they were. And they keep working that plantation. And to make matters worse, and this is where I will leave it, is these southern states are allowed to rewrite their laws. And so what they do is they rewrite them. Yes, you are free, but we are going to find ways to limit the rights that you might have. I'll give you an example. There were a few states in the South that said, look, if you are a freed slave, you are welcome to purchase land. If you're able to save up enough money and you want to buy some farmland for you and your family, absolutely you can do that. But all you have to do is prove that your grandfather was a free man. We call these grandfather clauses. If you can prove that your grandpa was a free man, then buy up all the land you want. How many freed slaves in the South do you think are going to be able to prove that Grandpa was a free man? Grandpa is probably dead, but Grandpa's undoubtedly probably a slave. So, yeah, yes, we've said, here's your chance. All you got to do is prove this. Very few people are going to be able to prove that, right? So, where we leave it is this is, trash. It's a Southerner helping his Southern people. And so when we come back tomorrow, we're going to, radical guys, think about what that word means. It's not going to be Mr. Nice Guy anymore. This is going to be a very different phase of Reconstruction. Your questions can either go in the basket, or if you trust yourself, you can hold on to those. We'll take maybe 15, 20 minutes tomorrow and finish those up. And then we're going to spend some time with Freddie Douglass. I do too. You say you don't know Freddie Douglass?